Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Inshallah, today we'll cover two more deceptions against the concept of prophethood, and this will beginning with the third deception, and that is the accusation against the prophets, or to accuse the prophets of being sorcerers and magicians. In other words, the prophets come with miraculous abilities to be able to split the moon, water coming out of the hand of the Prophet ﷺ, Musa's stick transforming into a large snake, among other things. One of the primary accusations of the anti-prophets was to say that this is just a super form of magic and these guys are magicians. And the Quran documents this. And therefore, some accusations against prophets that these are just magicians who are capable of doing magic that really is very, very effective and very profound. And the response to this is actually quite simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He gave these prophets these miracles, He gave them things that again are simply inexplainable and are irreplicable by other people. So when Musa ﷺ was challenged by the sorcerers immediately knew that what Musa is doing is not magic. As they immediately acknowledged that the way Musa is speaking and behaving, the things that he is saying and the message that he is calling to is not part of sorcery. This guy is not a sorcerer. And that's why they, as soon as they saw the miracle of Musa ﷺ, they accepted it. They recognized this cannot be magic. So if those sorcerers were capable of playing illusions and mind games and optical illusions on the audience, right, they weren't able to cause a stick to become a living organism. Even though the doctors of the time of Isa ﷺ were able to administer very effective remedies to powerful ailments, they weren't able to revive the dead. So if you want to take the most profound and capable sorcerers and illusionists and have them display the most profound forms of magic and illusion, it does not come anywhere near what the prophets were able to do. No one can split the moon. In today's technologies, no one can split the moon. And let's just say that a bomb is developed that can destroy the moon. Can they put it back together? So when the Prophet ﷺ split the moon, he didn't just split the moon and leave it there. It came back together. So if they are able to blow up the moon or to cause it to sunder, they can't put it back together. That's simply beyond human capabilities. So how can they compare the play and the illusions and the falsities of magicians and sorcerers to the miracles of the prophets that far excel in that regard? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses this accusation in the end of Surah Ash-Shu'ara. That last page addresses it in a few ways. One of those is هَلْ أُنَبِّئُكُمْ عَلَى مَنْ تَنَزَّلُ الشَّيَاطِينَ تَنَزَّلُ عَلَى كُلِّ أَفَّاكٍ أَثِيمٍ يُلْقُونَ السَّمْعَ وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ كَاذِبُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, shall I not inform you upon who the devils have descended upon? This is referring to the sorcerers and the fortune tellers, because it was well known by the Arabs at that time and others that these sorcerers and fortune tellers, they work with the jinn. They work with the jinn. And in order for the jinn to work with these human beings, the human beings need to behave in certain ways and they need to become clear mushriks, clear pagans and polytheists, and clearly proclaim their animosity towards Allah and the messengers. And there are certain characteristics that all of these sorcerers and fortune tellers embody, such as lying. They are inconsistent, they make mistakes. Now what these verses are saying, that when you compare the behavior of fortune tellers, their qualities, characteristics with the prophets, you find something completely different. The sorcerers and fortune tellers make mistakes. Prophets don't make mistakes. They say lies. The prophets don't lie. So there's a clear distinction between these two categories of humanity and human beings and whatnot. So there's clear distinctions between these two types of people. The fourth deception is the following. And this is pretty contemporary to a modern liberal society that has effective educational institutions. And that is to say the following. The message and the information given by the prophets and promoted by the prophets can be reached through rational inquiry. So the prophet comes and says, worship only one God. There is no God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, rationally speaking, you can come to a conclusion, to the same conclusion. So if a person were to look to the world and discuss from a philosophical sense, what is the structure of this universe indicating in terms of metaphysics, in terms of divine realities? Well, these major philosophers, even modern ones, such as the Western philosophers, through rational inquiry, as one quote from a particular book says that, quoting the Western philosophers, that we as the Western philosophers, aside from the overcomplicated theological discussions, and aside from the thousands of commentaries on the Bible, we believe that the one who manages this universe is one God. How did they come to this conclusion? Through rational inquiry. Look at the universe. It is organized and is working in a systematic way that points us to one manager. So the consistency points to one, whereas if there were more than one, you would find inconsistency. And this argument is made in the Quran as well. Right? So we don't need prophets because our rational capabilities will lead us to the same truths that these prophets are portraying. And the answer to this is the following. Even if the mind is capable of reaching these conclusions, that does not mean that we don't need a teacher to help us get there. Okay? So if a few philosophers are able to come to the conclusion that there's only one God governing this universe, that doesn't mean all of humanity can. Right? Furthermore, just because you understood this macro divine reality does not mean you understand the micro divine realities. Just because a person acknowledges that there can only be one God managing this universe does not necessarily teach us what that God wants of us and how to worship Him. So when you apply this idea to other secular sciences, I can come to the rational conclusion that eating something off of the ground will cause my stomach to hurt. Right? That's a rational inquiry. I noticed that one time I ate from the ground, my stomach hurt. A second time, the same thing. A third time, the same thing. I can now make a pretty accurate conclusion that it's not good to eat from the floor. Right? Does that mean I no longer need doctors to teach me about medicine and health? Does it mean that we no longer need medical experts to teach us about these realities? Does it mean we no longer need to learn about biology? So just because we could come to some conclusions about these truths through purely rational inquiry does not mean we do not need prophets to teach us about the more minute and overall, the more minute and nuanced details of this. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And this is something that is very important for our times today. A lot of the youth deceive themselves into thinking that, well, I can come to these truths alone. I could figure it out myself. I don't need a prophet. That's simply not the way it works. We worship Allah based on what Allah wants from us, because worship is submission. And we are only submissive to Allah when we follow His commands. So if I am able to logically conclude that Allah is worthy of worship, I still need Allah to teach me how to worship Him. Or else just worshiping Allah in random ways really goes back to the way I see fit and the way I want to worship Allah. And that is really in reality worship of the self, not in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.